A shy young farmer stands frozen at the entrance of a corporate boardroom, clutching soil samples and a property deed as executives debate the fate of a tech company that could transform her dying village. For months, Mei Lin has struggled to save her community from a devastating drought while hiding her connection to the unconscious CEO she rescued from the mountains 6 weeks ago. Now, as the DNA results confirm what the distinctive jade pendant and family records have already revealed, Mei must decide whether to tell this powerful stranger the truth. That the valley he's threatening to abandon isn't just her home, it's his ancestral birthplace, the land his grandfather swore to protect before disappearing 25 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun was setting behind the jagged peaks of Longhua Valley, casting long shadows across Mei Lin's modest fields. At 24, her slender frame betrayed none of the strength she had developed through years of working the stubborn mountain soil. Her father used to say she was like the bamboo that grew along the eastern ridge, delicate in appearance but capable of withstanding storms that toppled sturdier trees. Today, she would need that resilience as she made her final checks before the approaching typhoon. "Almost done, Bao Bao," she called to her loyal Tibetan mastiff, who patrolled the perimeter of the greenhouse with watchful eyes. The aging dog had been her faithful companion since childhood, a protective presence through years of mounting challenges. Mei finished securing the last panel of her experimental greenhouse, an innovation she had designed using reclaimed materials and techniques learned through countless late nights studying agricultural engineering videos online. The radio crackled with static as the weather service upgraded their forecast from heavy rain to potential flash flooding. Mei methodically ran through her mental checklist. Irrigation channels cleared to redirect water flow, emergency generator fueled and tested, reinforced barriers installed around the new seedlings, supplies for at least 5 days stored in the farmhouse. Living in the most remote village in Yunnan province had taught her to anticipate problems before they arrived. Inside her modest home, ancestral photographs lined the walls beside certificates recognizing her agricultural innovations. The modest farmhouse told the story of 4 generations who had cultivated this land, adapting traditional techniques to the challenging mountain environment. Yet despite her ingenuity, Mei knew the farm and the entire village of Longhua faced an existential threat far greater than any storm. The devastating drought of the past 3 years had depleted groundwater reserves and left many fields barren. The government-built reservoir had fallen to critical levels, and the ancient irrigation systems designed by her ancestors could no longer compensate. Half the village families had already relocated to urban centers, abandoning centuries-old homesteads for factory jobs and crowded apartments. Mei set a pot of jasmine tea to steep while reviewing the latest soil analysis results spread across her kitchen table. The pages revealed what she already knew but was reluctant to admit. Without significant intervention, the soil degradation would reach a tipping point within 18 months. Her experimental techniques were promising but required resources the village simply didn't have. Her gaze drifted to the calendar hanging beside her refrigerator, where next Thursday's date was circled in red. The final community meeting before the regional council would determine whether to classify Longhua as a non-viable settlement, bureaucratic language that would effectively condemn the village to abandonment. The designation would cut off remaining infrastructure support and offer relocation packages that amounted to a fraction of the land's true value. "We can't give up yet," Mei whispered to herself, a mantra that had sustained her through increasingly desperate times. Her fingers traced the topographical map of the valley, land her family had cultivated for 4 generations, each facing their own challenges and finding ways to overcome them. The wind picked up outside, whistling through the eaves of the old farmhouse. Bao Bao growled softly, his ears perking toward the western ridge where the hiking trail passed. The path had once been a popular route for adventurous tourists seeking authentic rural experiences, but visitors had dwindled to almost nothing as news of the drought spread. Now only occasional serious hikers or lost travelers found their way to Longhua. Mei moved to the window, squinting through the gathering darkness at whatever had caught Bao Bao's attention. The faint but unmistakable beam of a flashlight bobbed along the ridge trail, moving erratically in a way that suggested someone unfamiliar with the terrain. "Who would be out there with this storm coming?" she murmured, concern overriding her usual wariness of strangers. The weather service had issued clear warnings, and even experienced locals knew better than to risk the mountain paths during a typhoon. The light disappeared momentarily, then reappeared closer to the valley floor, followed by what sounded like a distant call for help. Mei hesitated only briefly before grabbing her emergency pack and raincoat. Her natural shyness had always made interactions with outsiders difficult, but her sense of responsibility was stronger. "Stay, Bao Bao," she instructed, though the dog clearly disagreed with the command, whining anxiously. "I'll be back soon." Mei secured a length of rope around her waist and attached the other end to the sturdy post at the edge of her property, a precaution her father had taught her for navigating in poor visibility. The first heavy raindrops began to fall as she headed toward the distress signal, her powerful flashlight cutting through the deepening darkness. The mountain paths were already growing treacherous, mud beginning to slicken rocks that had been dust-dry for months. The irony wasn't lost on Mei. After years of praying for rain, its sudden arrival brought new dangers. She called out in both Mandarin and English, her voice nearly lost in the intensifying storm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Hello, are you hurt? Call out so I can find you." For several moments there was no response, and Mei feared she had imagined the light or lost track of the hiker's position. Then faintly from her right came a response in accented Mandarin. "Help! Here!" Mei adjusted her course, carefully navigating around a steep drop that would be invisible to someone unfamiliar with the terrain. The rain was falling harder, now reducing visibility to mere meters, despite her powerful light. She called out again, receiving a weaker response that heightened her concern. As she rounded a bend in the path, her light finally illuminated a figure slumped against a boulder. A man in expensive but inappropriate hiking gear was clutching his leg, his face pale with pain and cold beneath the beginnings of a well-groomed beard. Beside him lay a high-end camera with a broken lens and a sleek backpack that spoke of quality but not practical knowledge of mountain conditions. "I'm here to help," Mei said, kneeling beside him while maintaining a cautious distance. "What happened?" "Slipped," the man replied through gritted teeth, his Mandarin fluent but carrying the unmistakable accent of someone who had learned it later in life. "I think my ankle is broken. I was trying to photograph the valley before the storm hit, but the path gave way." Mei assessed the situation quickly. The man appeared to be in his mid-30s, tall and fit, but clearly in no condition to walk back to the village. The injury might not be a break, but was at minimum a severe sprain. More concerning was his inadequate clothing. The lightweight jacket he wore was already soaked through, and the temperature would drop dangerously once night fully descended. "I'm Mei Lin," she introduced herself, already unpacking emergency supplies from her pack. "My farm is about 1/2 kilometer from here. We need to get you there before this storm gets worse." "James Chen," he replied, wincing as she examined his ankle. "I'm sorry to trouble you. My driver was supposed to return before the storm, but there must have been a miscommunication." The name struck Mei as vaguely familiar, but she pushed the thought aside to focus on the immediate problem. She applied a compression bandage to stabilize his ankle, then helped him into the emergency poncho from her pack. "We need to move now," she explained, her natural shyness temporarily overwhelmed by the urgency of the situation. "This valley can flood quickly when heavy rain comes after drought. I'll help support your weight, but you'll need to hop on your good foot." James nodded grimly, his face tightening with pain as Mei helped him stand. He was considerably taller than her, making the awkward three-legged walk back to the farm a significant challenge. The rope Mei had secured served as both guide and safety line as they slowly navigated the increasingly hazardous path. The journey that would normally take 10 minutes stretched to nearly an hour, with frequent stops as James fought through waves of pain. The rain had become a deluge, the wind driving it horizontally across the exposed path. Mei maintained a steady stream of instructions and encouragement, suppressing her usual reticence to keep James focused and moving. When they finally reached the farmhouse, both were exhausted and drenched despite their protective gear. Bao Bao greeted them with anxious barking, circling the strange man with suspicious eyes until Mei gave him a reassuring command. "Let me help you to the sofa," Mei directed, guiding James through the door and into the modest main room. The contrast between his obvious wealth and her simple surroundings became more apparent in the light. His watch alone probably cost more than all her farming equipment combined. Once James was settled, Mei moved with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire in the wood stove, gathering towels and dry clothes, and preparing her first aid supplies. Years of handling farm emergencies alone had made her competent in basic medical care. "I need to remove your boot to properly examine your ankle," she explained, her voice professional despite her discomfort with touching a stranger. "This will hurt, but it's necessary." James nodded, bracing himself as she carefully removed the expensive hiking boot. The ankle was severely swollen and beginning to bruise, but the skin wasn't broken, and the bones appeared to be in proper alignment. "I don't think it's broken," Mei assessed, gently palpating the area. "A bad sprain, though. You won't be walking normally for at least a week, probably longer." "A week?" James looked alarmed. "That's impossible. I have meetings in Shanghai starting Monday, critical negotiations that can't be postponed." Mei applied arnica gel and began wrapping the ankle properly. "Unless you have a helicopter hidden somewhere, you won't be leaving this valley for at least 3 days. The road floods during these storms, and the mountain paths are too dangerous, even for emergency services." The reality of his situation seemed to sink in as James looked out the window at the intensifying storm. Lightning illuminated the valley, in brief, stark flashes followed by thunder that rattled the farmhouse windows. "I need to make some calls," he said, reaching for his backpack. His expression fell as he extracted a waterlogged satellite phone. "Perfect. The storm will interfere with signals anyway," Mei explained, handing him a set of her father's old clothes. "These should fit well enough. You should change before you catch pneumonia on top of everything else." While James changed in the small bathroom, Mei prepared a simple meal from her preserved stores, rice congee with dried mushrooms and herbs from her greenhouse. The familiar routine helped calm her nerves. Having a stranger in her home, especially one who exuded such authority despite his injured state, was deeply unsettling for someone who had structured her life to minimize such interactions. When James returned, looking somewhat incongruous in the worn but clean farmer's clothes, Mei had set the table with steaming bowls of congee and herbal tea, known for its anti-inflammatory properties. "Thank you," he said with genuine gratitude, as he carefully lowered himself into a chair. "I would have been in serious trouble without your help." Mei nodded, keeping her eyes on her own bowl. "Anyone would have done the same." "I don't think that's true," James replied, studying her with an intensity that made Mei uncomfortable. "Most people wouldn't venture out in a typhoon to rescue a stranger." They ate in silence for several minutes, the howling wind and drumming. Rain filling the space where conversation would normally be. Mei occasionally glanced up to find James studying the photographs on her walls or the agricultural certificates and diagrams pinned to her bulletin board. "You're an agricultural engineer?" he asked finally, gesturing toward a framed certificate from an online university. "Self-taught, mostly," Mei admitted, her voice quiet. "I completed some distance learning programs when I could afford them." "These designs are innovative," James observed, indicating the irrigation system diagrams, combining traditional techniques with modern materials. "Very clever." The unexpected compliment brought color to Mei's cheeks. "The old ways have wisdom, but they need adaptation for changing conditions." James nodded thoughtfully. "My grandfather used to say something similar. He believed in honoring tradition while embracing necessary change." He paused, wincing slightly as he shifted his injured leg. "This valley seems to be struggling, though. I noticed many abandoned fields on my hike." The observation touched on Mei's deepest concerns, momentarily overcoming her shyness. 3 years of drought have pushed us to the breaking point. The younger generation has mostly left for the cities. Those of us remaining are trying everything we can, but without significant investment in water management infrastructure. She trailed off, realizing she was revealing too much to a complete stranger. James, however, seemed genuinely interested, asking intelligent questions about the specific challenges and Mei's experimental solutions. His knowledge of agricultural economics surprised her, and she gradually found herself explaining the community's situation in greater detail than she had intended. "The regional council is voting next week on whether to classify us as non-viable," she explained, the words bitter in her mouth. "If that happens, Longhua Village will essentially cease to exist after 400 years. "That seems drastic," James commented. "Surely there are alternatives." Mei's expression darkened. "The alternatives require capital we don't have. The government has other priorities, and private investors see no profit potential in a remote farming community." A strange expression crossed James's face, but before he could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the house, and the lights flickered ominously. "We should prepare for a power outage," Mei said, rising to gather emergency lanterns. "The storm is intensifying." As if responding to her words, the electricity failed completely, plunging the house into darkness, broken only by the orange glow of the wood stove. Mei moved confidently in the darkness, lighting the oil lanterns she had positioned strategically. Around the main room. "You're well prepared," James observed, as warm light filled the space once more. "Necessity," Mei replied simply. She checked the time on her wind-up clock. "It's getting late, and you need rest to help with healing. You can take my parents' room. I'll sleep out here on the sofa." James started to protest, but Mei's determined expression silenced him. She helped him to the bedroom, providing extra blankets against the growing chill and making sure he had water and pain-relieving herbs within reach. "Thank you, Mei Lin," he said as she prepared to leave the room. "I'm in your debt." Mei simply nodded and withdrew, closing the door softly behind her. Alone in the main room with only Bao Bao for company, she finally allowed herself to process the strange turn her evening had taken. A wealthy stranger was now sleeping in her parents' bed while a typhoon raged outside, a complication she hadn't anticipated when securing her farm that afternoon. She settled on the sofa with a worn agricultural journal, trying to distract herself from both the storm and the unsettling presence in her home. Bao Bao rested his massive head on her lap, offering silent comfort as he had through so many difficult nights. "What are the chances, Bao Bao?" she whispered, stroking his graying fur. "Of all the mountains in China, he had to get injured on ours." The dog huffed in response, his amber eyes reflecting the lantern light. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the valley, water flowing down the carefully engineered channels Mei had constructed to protect her fields. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as her mind filled with concerns about her injured guest, the upcoming council vote, and the increasingly desperate future of Longhua Village. What Mei couldn't possibly know as she finally drifted into fitful sleep was that the storm had delivered not just an injured hiker to her door, but a man whose decisions would determine whether her beloved village survived or vanished into history. Nor could she have imagined that the jade pendant she had glimpsed around James Chen's neck bore the exact same distinctive pattern as the one in her grandmother's treasured photograph, the one showing her grandfather standing proudly beside his best friend before they departed for university in America, never to return to Longhua. The connection that would soon be revealed between them would challenge everything Mei thought she knew about her family's history, and offer an unexpected chance to save the home she had fought so desperately to preserve. Morning arrived with eerie silence, the absence of rain and wind creating a vacuum after the night's tumult. Mei woke with a start, momentarily disoriented to find herself on the sofa rather than in her bed. The events of the previous evening rushed back as she heard movement from her parents' bedroom, followed by a muffled groan of pain. She rose quickly, splashing water on her face and smoothing her rumpled clothes before checking on her unexpected guest. A knock at the bedroom door elicited a strained "Come in." James sat on the edge of the bed, his injured ankle noticeably more swollen than the night before. Despite the pain evident in his expression, he had attempted to make himself presentable, his hair neatly combed and his borrowed clothes straightened. "How bad is it?" Mei asked, kneeling to examine the injury. "Worse than yesterday," James admitted. "I tried to stand and nearly blacked out." Mei nodded, her expression confirming his assessment. "The swelling needs to be addressed before it causes more problems. I'll prepare a traditional poultice and find stronger pain relief." As she worked, gathering herbs from her carefully organized medicinal stores, James observed her with growing curiosity. "You seem very knowledgeable about natural medicine as well as agriculture." "Necessity again," Mei replied, grinding herbs with practiced movements. "The nearest doctor is 2 hours away when the roads are clear, which they won't be after last night's storm." She applied the pungent poultice to his ankle, wrapping it with clean bandages, then helped him to the main room where he could elevate the leg properly. The morning light revealed the full extent of the storm's impact. Fallen branches scattered across the yard, debris caught in the irrigation channels, but thankfully, no major structural damage to the farm buildings. "I need to check the village," Mei explained as she prepared a simple breakfast of rice porridge and preserved vegetables. "Some of the older residents might need help cleaning up, and we'll need to assess damage to the community buildings." "Of course," James nodded, though his expression suggested he was unaccustomed to being left behind. "Is there anything I can do from here?" Mei hesitated, considering the question. "If you're feeling up to it, there are some calculations for the irrigation system that need reviewing." She gestured to the papers spread across her desk. "But you should rest if—" "I'd be happy to help," James interrupted, a hint of eagerness in his voice. "Sitting uselessly isn't my strength." Mei arranged the papers within his reach, along with a calculator and reference materials. "These are projections for water capture efficiency with different materials. I'm trying to maximize collection with minimal cost." James examined the figures with obvious interest. "This is complex work. Where did you learn hydraulic engineering?" "Books, online courses when I could access them, trial and error," Mei replied, packing supplies into her backpack. "The village internet connection is unreliable, but I download resources whenever possible." She hesitated at the door, uncomfortable leaving a stranger in her home, yet reluctant to delay checking on her neighbors. "There's food in the kitchen, and Bao Bao will stay with you. He knows to bark 3 times if there's any problem. The massive dog settled beside James's chair with an air of resignation, clearly understanding his assignment, even if he didn't particularly like it. "We'll be fine," James assured her. "Go help your community." The walk to the village center revealed the storm's impact. Mudslides had partially blocked the main road, and several older buildings showed structural damage. The community hall, which served as school, meeting place, and emergency shelter, had lost part of its roof. Villagers were already at work making repairs, their weathered faces showing the determined resilience that had sustained Longhua through centuries of challenges. "Mei Lin!" called old Wu, the village elder who had become a grandfather figure to Mei after her parents' death. "We feared the western fields might have been washed out. You're unharmed." "I'm fine, Grandfather Wu," she assured him, the honorary title coming naturally. The drainage channels worked as designed. The farm survived with minimal damage. She joined the community efforts, helping to clear debris and patch roofs, distributing the emergency medical supplies she had brought from her stores. Throughout the morning, she found herself explaining her absent presence at the farm. An injured hiker, caught in the storm, nothing serious, while deflecting curious questions about this unusual visitor. By midday, the essential repairs were complete, and the community gathered in the partially restored hall to share a meal and discuss next steps. The conversation inevitably turned to the upcoming council vote. Representative Zhang called on the emergency radio, old Wu informed the group, his voice grave. "The storm has postponed the council meeting by 2 days, but the preliminary vote remains unchanged. Unless something dramatic changes, Longhua will be designated non-viable." A heavy silence fell over the gathering. Many of the remaining residents were elderly, their children and grandchildren having already departed for urban opportunities. For them, relocation meant not just leaving homes, but abandoning ancestral lands where generations of their families were buried. "What about your new irrigation system, Mei Lin?" asked Mrs. Huang, who maintained the village's communal vegetable garden. "Could that make a difference?" Mei shook her head reluctantly. "The prototype is promising, but scaling it would require materials and equipment we can't afford. I've submitted the designs to 3 agricultural development funds, but none have responded." "Perhaps your foreign visitor might invest," suggested Lao Chen with a wry smile. "I heard he wears a watch worth more than my house." The comment drew sad laughter from the group. The idea that a wealthy tourist would take interest in their struggling village seemed like a cruel joke after years of being overlooked by both government programs and private investors. "He's just a hiker with a sprained ankle," Mei corrected, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "He'll leave as soon as the road's clear." The meeting concluded with practical assignments for continuing cleanup and a schedule for sharing the limited community generator until power was restored. As the villagers dispersed, old Wu pulled Mei aside, his weathered face serious. "There is something I must discuss with you," he said quietly, "about the land records you've been researching." Mei followed him to his small home, where he carefully extracted a lacquered box from beneath a floorboard. Inside lay documents yellowed with age, their careful calligraphy recording land transactions and family histories dating back centuries. "I found this," Wu said, removing a photograph protected between sheets of oiled paper. "It was taken the year before your grandfather left for America." Mei studied the image, 2 young men standing proudly in front of Longhua's ancient spirit. A gate, arms around each other's shoulders. One was clearly her grandfather in his youth, his familiar features unmistakable despite the decades that separated this image from her memories. The other was a stranger, tall and confident, wearing a distinctive jade pendant around his neck. "Who is he?" Mei asked, though something about the pendant nagged at her memory. "Chen Jianhao, your grandfather's sworn brother," Wu explained. They grew up together, studied together, and were accepted to the same American university. Both left, but only Chen returned to China years later, becoming a successful businessman in Shanghai. Wu's gnarled finger tapped the pendant visible in the photograph. This jade piece was carved from a single stone, split into two matching halves. Your grandfather wore one, Chen the other. They were symbols of their blood oath to always protect Longhua and its people. Mei's heart began to race as the connection formed in her mind. The pendant in the photograph and the one she had glimpsed around James Chen's neck the previous night. The familiar elements suddenly aligned with disturbing clarity. The Chen family, Wu continued, unaware of Mei's realization, grew wealthy in the technology industry. There were rumors that Chen Jianhao intended to fulfill his oath by investing in Longhua's development, but he died before any plans materialized. When? Mei asked, her voice barely audible. 25 years ago, Wu replied. His son showed no interest in his father's sentimental connection to a remote village. The Chen family name became associated with major developments in Shanghai and Beijing, not rural preservation. Mei's mind raced with implications. If James Chen was connected to this family, perhaps a grandson of Chen Jianhao, his presence in Longhua was far from random. The expensive camera, the satellite phone, his knowledge of agricultural economics. He wasn't a tourist, but potentially someone evaluating the valley for other purposes. "Thank you for showing me this, Grandfather Wu," she said, carefully returning the photograph. "I should get back to check on my guest." The old man nodded, his wise eyes suggesting he understood more than Mei had articulated. "Remember, child, oaths made on jade are considered binding, not just to those who make them, but to their descendants as well. The spirits take such promises seriously, even when humans forget." Mei hurried back to her farm, questions churning. In her mind, was James Chen's presence an opportunity or a threat? Was he aware of his family's connection to Longhua, or was this genuinely coincidental? And if he did know, what were his intentions toward a village already balanced on the edge of extinction? She approached her farmhouse with uncharacteristic hesitation, steeling herself for a conversation that might determine not just her future, but that of the entire community. Through the window, she could see James sitting at her desk, completely absorbed in the irrigation designs. Pages of calculations in his precise handwriting spread before him. For better or worse, the storm had delivered someone with the power to change Longhua's fate directly to her doorstep. Now she needed to determine whether he would honor his grandfather's oath or become another force pushing her beloved village toward oblivion. The moment of truth approached as Mei placed her hand on the door handle, unaware that inside her modest home sat not just an injured hiker, but the CEO of Chen Innovations, one of China's largest technology companies, a man whose impending decision about a new, sustainable technology campus location would either breathe new life into Longhua Valley or consign it to memory. Mei Lin took a deep breath before pushing open the door to her farmhouse, the weight of her discovery making each step feel significant. The hinges creaked slightly, announcing her return. James looked up from her desk, where he had arranged her irrigation calculations into neat stacks alongside his own notations. "You've developed an impressive system here," he said by way of greeting, gesturing to the papers. "With some modifications to the collection surfaces, you could increase efficiency by nearly 30%. Mei set down her pack, studying, his face for any sign that he recognized the significance of where he was. Any indication that his presence in Longhua was more than the random misfortune of an injured hiker. His expression remained open but unreadable. The village suffered some damage, she reported, moving to the kitchen to prepare tea, a ritual that would give her hands something to do while she gathered her thoughts. Nothing catastrophic, but the community hall lost part of its roof. "No casualties, I hope?" James asked, genuine concern in his voice. "No, we were fortunate. Longhua residents are experienced with storms." She placed the kettle on the stove, "though we have fewer residents each year to help with recovery." The subtle prompt hung in the air between them. James shifted slightly, wincing as his injured ankle protested the movement. "You mentioned yesterday that the regional council is voting to classify your village as non-viable," he said, accepting the opening she had provided. "What exactly does that designation mean?" Mei poured hot water over tea leaves, allowing their earthy aroma to fill the small kitchen. "Officially, it means the cost of maintaining infrastructure exceeds the economic output of the community. Unofficially, it means the government has decided we're not worth saving." She brought 2 steaming cups to the table, setting one before James and cradling the other between her palms. Once the designation is applied, essential services are gradually withdrawn. Road maintenance, power grid connection, emergency response coverage, all reduced to minimal levels before being eliminated entirely. "What happens to the residents?" James asked, his businesslike tone at odds with the compassion in his eyes. "Those who can afford it relocate to provincial cities, those who can't." Mei shrugged, the gesture containing volumes of unspoken concern. "Many of our elders would rather die on their ancestral land than abandon it. Their families have been here for centuries." James nodded thoughtfully, turning his teacup in his hands. "And you? You're young, educated, despite limited resources. You could find opportunities elsewhere." The question was precisely what Mei's few remaining age peers asked whenever they returned to visit families during holidays. Her answer had become well-rehearsed, but no less sincere for its repetition. "This land holds more than economic value," she said quietly. "My parents died bringing medicine to isolated families during the flash floods 5 years ago. They're buried on the eastern ridge, alongside 15 generations of our ancestors." Her eyes met his directly, unusual confidence, replacing her typical shyness when speaking about matters close to her heart. "I'm the last Lin in Longhua. If I leave, who will remember them? Who will tend their graves and honor their sacrifices?" James held her gaze, something shifting in his expression. "Your loyalty is admirable. Rare in today's China." "Not rare in Longhua," Mei corrected gently. "Everyone who remains shares similar values. We stay because we believe this place matters, its history, its knowledge, its connection to the land." A moment of silence settled between them, broken only by Baobao's contented snoring from his place by the wood stove. Mei gathered her courage, deciding a direct approach was necessary. "Your pendant," she said, nodding toward the jade piece, visible at his collar. "It's unusual. Family heirloom." James's hand moved automatically to touch the smooth stone, surprise flickering across his features. "Yes, my grandfather's. He left it to me when he died, said it represented a promise." His eyes narrowed slightly. "How did you know it was a family piece?" Instead of answering, Mei crossed to a small cabinet and withdrew a worn leather album. She carefully opened it to a protected page and placed it before James. "This photograph was taken in 1975 at our village spirit gate." James stared at the image, recognition dawning in his eyes as he took in the 2 young men and the matching jade pendants they wore. His finger traced the face of the taller youth. "My grandfather," he murmured, then looked up at Mei with new understanding. "And yours?" Mei nodded. "They were sworn brothers who left together to study engineering at MIT. Your grandfather returned to China to build his company, Mine stayed in America, sending money home but never returning. She paused, allowing James to process this connection. You didn't know about this when you came to Longhua. It wasn't a question, but James shook. His head, anyway. I knew my grandfather grew up in a village in Yunnan province. He spoke of it sometimes, especially in his final years. His expression grew troubled, but I had no idea it was Longhua specifically, or that his sworn brother's family still lived here. He looked down at the photograph again, his corporate mask momentarily slipping to reveal genuine emotion. Grandfather said he made a promise to protect something precious, that someday I might need to honor that commitment. I thought he was being poetically vague, as the elderly often are. He and my grandfather swore an oath to always protect Longhua and its people, Mei explained. They split a single piece of jade as witness to their promise. Understanding dawned on James's face. The pendant halves match, he realized. They would fit together like puzzle pieces. Yes, Mei confirmed. Village Elder Wu says oaths made on jade bind not just those who make them, but their descendants as well. James fell silent, absently rubbing his pendant between his fingers, a habit Mei realized that he probably wasn't even conscious of. Finally, he spoke again, his voice carefully neutral. What exactly are you suggesting, Mei Lin? That I'm somehow obligated to intervene in your village's situation because of an oath made before I was born? The question could have sounded defensive or dismissive, but instead carried genuine curiosity. Mei considered her answer carefully, aware that her response might determine whether James would become an ally or merely a visitor passing through. I'm not suggesting anything, she said honestly. I only know that in a country of over 1 billion people, you specifically found yourself injured on the mountain above our village during a storm that made escape impossible, exactly 1 week before a vote that will determine whether Longhua continues to exist. She offered a small, uncertain smile. I don't believe in coincidences of such magnitude. James's expression suggested he was weighing her words against his natural business pragmatism. Even if I accepted some form of inherited responsibility, he said slowly, what could I realistically do about a government designation process that's already underway? Mei hesitated, years of suppressed hope threatening to surface. I don't know exactly, but you're clearly someone with resources and connections. Perhaps there are options we haven't considered because we lack access to the right people. James's phone chose that moment to emit a notification sound, surprising them both. The storm must have cleared enough for satellite signals, he observed, reaching for the device. Mei busied herself clearing the teacups, giving him privacy as he scrolled through messages. His expression grew increasingly concerned as he read. I need to make a call, he said finally. Is there somewhere with reliable reception? The ridge behind the greenhouse gets the clearest signal, Mei offered. But with your ankle, I'll manage, James insisted, already attempting to stand. He wavered, clearly underestimating the pain, and Mei moved quickly to support him. At least let me help you there, she said, her natural concern overriding the awkwardness of physical contact with a virtual stranger. Together, they made their way slowly to the ridge, James leaning heavily on both Mei and a walking stick she had fashioned from a sturdy branch. The late afternoon sun illuminated the valley below, the storm's aftermath evident in swollen streams and scattered debris, but also in the vibrant green of vegetation soaking up the desperately needed moisture. You can see almost the entire village from here, Mei observed, as James tested his reception. My ancestors chose this location deliberately, protected from the harshest winds, but with clear sightlines in all directions. James nodded distractedly, his attention focused on his phone. I need privacy for this call, he said, more businesslike than before. Corporate matters. Mei withdrew to a respectful distance, though close enough to assist if needed. As she pretended to inspect storm damage to nearby trees. Snippets of his conversation reached her despite his lowered voice. Postpone the board meeting. Unexpected circumstances. Potential alternative site. Preliminary environmental surveys. The formal, authoritative tone he used bore little resemblance to the injured hiker who had gratefully accepted her help the previous night. When James finally ended his call, his expression had transformed, the casual visitor replaced by someone accustomed to making consequential decisions. He beckoned Mei to rejoin him. "I haven't been entirely forthcoming about who I am," he began, meeting her eyes directly. "My full name is James Chen Jianhao, named after my grandfather. I'm the CEO of Chen Innovations." Mei couldn't entirely hide her reaction. Chen Innovations was one of China's largest technology companies, specializing in sustainable energy systems and agricultural technology. Even in remote Longhua, the name was well known. "I see," she said carefully, thousands of questions suddenly competing for priority. "And what brings the CEO of Chen Innovations to hike alone in our remote mountains?" James sighed, running a hand through his hair, a disarmingly human gesture from someone who had just revealed himself to be one of China's most powerful businessmen. "Technically, site evaluation," he admitted, though not for Longhua specifically. "We're planning a new research campus focused on sustainable agriculture and water purification technology. My development team identified 3 potential locations in Yunnan province based on technical criteria." He gestured toward the valley below. "I've been visiting each site personally, away from entourages and formal presentations. I find I get a clearer sense of a place when I experience it directly, without filters." Mei processed this information, connections forming rapidly in her mind. "And Longhua is one of these potential sites?" "No," James replied, surprising her. "At least it wasn't. Our analysis suggested the valley's water scarcity issues made it unsuitable." He paused, looking out over the landscape with new consideration. "But that analysis was conducted using satellite imagery and regional data. It didn't account for microclimate factors or historical connections." Hope flared in Mei's chest, but she contained it carefully. "What would make a location suitable for your campus?" James seemed to appreciate her practical question. "We need sufficient land for research facilities and demonstration fields, relatively flat terrain for construction, access to transportation, infrastructure, though we're willing to develop that if necessary, and most importantly, a watershed that can support our water-intensive research. Our valley had abundant water until the drought," Mei pointed out. "The underground springs that feed our irrigation system have never completely failed, even in the worst years." "That's significant," James acknowledged. "Most sites we've considered have more serious hydrological limitations." He turned to face her fully. "Tell me honestly, Mei Lin, if resources weren't constrained, do you believe Longhua could recover?" The question struck directly at Mei's deepest convictions, the belief that had kept her working endless hours, experimenting with limited materials, and fighting against the slow dissolution of her community when others had given up. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "The fundamentals are sound. Our soil quality remains good despite the drought. Our traditional knowledge base is intact. Through our elders and our community fabric, though strained, hasn't broken. What we lack is capital to implement solutions we already understand." James nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I'd like to see your experimental greenhouse before we return to the house. Can you show me?" The greenhouse stood as Mei's proudest achievement, a structure combining traditional wisdom with modern materials she had salvaged, repurposed, or purchased with precious savings. Inside, carefully organized sections demonstrated various growing techniques adapted for drought conditions. Despite his injury, James moved through the space with evident interest, asking detailed questions about her water recycling system, soil amendments, and temperature regulation approach. His understanding of the technical aspects impressed Mei, who was accustomed to explaining her work in simplified terms to neighbors who respected but didn't fully comprehend her innovations. "This is remarkable," he said finally, examining a hydroponic setup she had constructed from reclaimed plastic pipes and local stone. "You've essentially recreated technologies that cost my company millions to develop, using materials you could gather locally." Mei flushed at the compliment. "Necessity drives innovation. I couldn't afford commercial systems, so I had to design alternatives. That kind of adaptive thinking is exactly what our research division tries to foster," James observed. "We put engineers in resource-constrained scenarios to force creative solutions." He smiled slightly, "though we pay them considerably more than you've managed on your own." As they made their way back to the farmhouse, James grew quieter, clearly, processing everything he had learned. Mei respected his silence, focusing instead on ensuring he didn't further injure his ankle on the uneven path. Inside, she prepared a simple dinner from her stores while James made another brief call, this time speaking in rapid English that Mei, with her limited language skills, couldn't follow. The formality in his demeanor remained, but something else had entered his expression, a resolved quality suggesting decisions had been made. They ate together at Mei's small table, the meal simple but nourishing. As they finished, James finally spoke about what was clearly occupying his thoughts. "I need to be honest with you about something else," he began. "Chen Innovations has been seeking a location for our sustainable technology campus for nearly a year. We've narrowed it to 2 sites with a board vote scheduled for next week." He paused. "The leading candidate is a valley about 200 kilometers from here, already approved for development by provincial authorities." Mei nodded, uncertain where this disclosure was leading but appreciating his candor. "However," James continued, "I have reservations about that site. The local ecology has already been significantly disrupted by previous industrial activity. Remediation would be costly, and the surrounding community has been largely displaced by earlier developments." He leaned forward slightly, his expression intensifying. "Our company mission statement commits us to honoring the past while building the future. It's something my grandfather insisted upon when founding the company, though in recent years, the board has sometimes treated it as merely aspirational language." Understanding began to dawn on Mei. "And you're considering Longhua as an alternative site?" "I'm considering it," James confirmed cautiously, "but there would be significant obstacles. The non-viable designation your council is voting on would make development legally complicated. Water scarcity remains a legitimate concern for a research facility, and convincing my board to change direction this late in the process would require compelling arguments." "What would you need to make those arguments?" Mei asked, practical even as hope threatened to overwhelm her customary caution. James considered the question. Comprehensive data on the valley's hydrology beyond what's available in public records. Evidence that the community would welcome technological development rather than resist it. A preliminary site assessment by qualified engineers. He spread his hands. All things that would normally take months to compile. "We have 5 days until the council vote," Mei said quietly, "and your board meets next week." "Yes, James." "Agreed. The timing is challenging." A silence fell between them, broken only by the occasional crackle from the wood stove. Outside, darkness had enveloped the valley, the stars emerging with the clarity only possible far from urban light. Pollution. "There's something else you should know," Mei said finally, "something that might matter to your decision." She rose and retrieved a rolled document from a cylinder stored carefully on her highest shelf. Spreading it on the table, she revealed a detailed map of the valley, hand-drawn but precise, with annotations in faded ink. "This was created by our grandfathers before they left for America," she explained. "It shows the complete underground spring system that feeds Longhua's watershed." Her finger traced blue lines that extended far beyond what modern surveys had documented. Much of the system has been forgotten because the main access points were covered by landslides decades ago, but the water is still there, flowing beneath the surface. James studied the map with growing interest. This would significantly change our hydrological assessment if these secondary springs could be accessed again. "They can be," Mei confirmed. "I've located 3 of the minor outlets already. Clearing the primary channels would require equipment I don't have, but the water itself hasn't diminished. It's just redirected underground." James looked up at her, new respect in his eyes. "Why are you sharing this with me? This map could be valuable to developers who might have very different plans for your valley." Mei met his gaze steadily. "Because I believe you came to Longhua for a reason. Because your grandfather and mine made a promise that still matters, and because sometimes the right path forward honors both the past and the future, just as your company's mission statement suggests." The directness of her answer seemed to affect James deeply. He looked back at the map, then out the window toward the darkened valley, his expression reflecting an internal struggle between business pragmatism and something more personal. "I need to see more of the village," he said finally. "Meet the people, understand the community beyond statistical assessments. If I'm going to advocate for Longhua to my board, I need to know exactly what I'm fighting for." "The road should be passable by tomorrow," Mei replied, careful to keep her tone measured despite the hope building within her. "I can show you everything then." James nodded, his decision apparently made. "I'll need to bring in a small team, a hydrologist, a structural engineer, perhaps an environmental impact specialist. With your permission, of course." "Of course," Mei agreed, momentarily overwhelmed by this sudden shift in Longhua's prospects. Yesterday, she had been preparing for what seemed like inevitable defeat. Now, a potential lifeline had appeared from the most unlikely source. "There's no guarantee," James cautioned, reading her expression. "The board could still vote against it. The government designation could complicate matters legally, and we would need the entire community's support for this to work." "I understand," Mei assured him. "But even the possibility is more than we had yesterday." As they continued discussing logistics late into the evening, neither could have fully articulated the strange sense of rightness that had settled between them, a feeling that perhaps their meeting wasn't coincidence, but the culmination of a promise made decades before by 2 young men who had split a single piece of jade and sworn to protect a valley that had nurtured them both. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, witnessing another chapter in Longhua's long history beginning to unfold, one that might determine whether the village would fade into memory or find new purpose in a rapidly changing world. The following morning dawned clear and brilliant, the storm's destructive energy transformed into life-giving moisture that made the entire valley shimmer. Mei woke early, her mind already racing with plans and possibilities stemming from the previous night's conversation. She moved quietly through her morning chores, not wanting to wake James, who had finally fallen asleep after hours of making notes and studying her maps. When he emerged from the bedroom, leaning less heavily on the walking stick than before, his expression held the focused determination she recognized from their discussions about the potential project. "I've made some calls," he announced without preamble. "A preliminary assessment team will arrive by helicopter this afternoon, if weather permits. They'll need access to various parts of the valley, especially the spring sites you identified." Mei nodded, momentarily overwhelmed by the sudden acceleration of events. I should inform Elder Wu and the village council. This affects everyone, and they should have a voice from the beginning. Agreed, James said, his business efficiency tempered with genuine respect. This can only work with full community support. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. I should also be clear that while I'm personally committed to exploring this possibility, there are forces within my company that prefer the other site. This won't be a simple process. Few worthwhile things are, Mei replied simply, but having a chance is more than we dared hope for yesterday. As they shared a quick breakfast, Mei found herself studying James with new eyes, seeing beyond both the injured hiker she had rescued and the powerful CEO he had revealed himself to be. In the morning light, focused on the possibility of honoring his grandfather's promise, he seemed most fully himself, a man of purpose navigating between obligation and opportunity, just as she had been doing on her smaller scale for years. What neither of them could have anticipated was how quickly their tentative plans would be challenged, nor the forces already aligning against them, forces that would test not only their practical resources, but the very oath that had brought them together across generations. The jade pendants they each carried would soon be tested as witnesses to a promise that stretched from the past into an uncertain future, with the fate of an entire community hanging in the balance. The village elders gathered in the partially repaired community hall, their weathered faces reflecting varying degrees of skepticism and hope, as Mei explained the extraordinary development. James stood beside her, his corporate authority momentarily eclipsed by his status as an outsider in this close-knit community. Chen Innovations is considering our valley for their new research campus, Mei concluded, her voice stronger and more confident than most had ever heard from the typically reserved young woman. Mr. Chen has brought specialists to assess the feasibility, but wanted to consult the village council first out of respect for our community. Elder Wu, who had recognized the significance of the jade pendant immediately, nodded appreciatively at this gesture. The Chen family honors old ways by seeking our counsel before bringing outsiders to our land. Not all were equally impressed. Lao Zhang, whose family had already sold their adjacent property to developers speculating on the valley's eventual abandonment, leaned forward with narrowed eyes. Why would a technology company choose our struggling village when the government itself has deemed us unsustainable? He challenged. What is your true purpose here, Mr. Chen? James met the elder's gaze directly. A fair question. Companies typically select sites based on economic factors and government incentives, but Chen Innovations was founded on principles that include honoring traditional knowledge and supporting sustainable communities. He touched his jade pendant briefly. My grandfather grew up in this valley. He made a promise to protect it. I've only recently learned of this connection, but I take such obligations seriously. Murmurs spread through the gathered elders. Most knew the story of the two young men who had left Longhua decades ago, one who had never returned and one who had become a business leader in distant Shanghai. The jade speaks, Elder Wu said solemnly. The grandson returns when the village faces its darkest hour. Fine sentiments, Lao Zhang persisted. But what exactly are you proposing? To turn our farmland into factories? To replace our traditional ways with your modern technology? James shook his head. Our vision is quite different. The campus would combine research facilities with demonstration fields, where traditional agricultural methods are studied, documented, and integrated with sustainable technologies. He gestured toward Mei, much like what Mei Lin has been doing, on her own farm, but with greater resources and scientific support. The goal, Mei added, finding courage in the importance of the moment, would be to preserve what makes Longhua special while creating new opportunities that would allow families to remain here or even return. The discussion continued for hours, moving from practical concerns about land use and water resources to deeper questions about cultural preservation and community identity. Throughout, James demonstrated a surprising sensitivity to the elders' concerns, adjusting his presentation based on their feedback and acknowledging the limitations of his understanding of their traditional ways. By mid-afternoon, the council had reached a tentative consensus to allow the preliminary assessment to proceed, with Elder Wu and 2 other respected community members assigned to accompany the specialists during their evaluation. As the meeting concluded, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors announced the arrival of James's team. The villagers emerged from their homes to witness 3 Chen Innovation specialists disembarking with equipment cases, the company logo prominently displayed on their uniforms and gear. "Your company works quickly," Elder Wu observed as they walked toward the landing site. "Time is critical," James replied, "both for your village's situation and for our corporate timeline." Mei noticed his slight shift in demeanor as his professional team approached, a straightening of his posture, a subtle hardening of his expression. The transformation from injured hiker to corporate leader was complete, yet she had seen beneath both roles to the person navigating between worlds, just as she often did herself. The assessment team leader, Dr. Lin Wei, approached with brisk efficiency. "Mr. Chen, we've brought the equipment you requested." She glanced at his ankle. "Ah, you all right, sir?" The executive office said there had been an accident. "I'm fine, Dr. Lin," James assured her. "Just a minor injury. I'd like to introduce Mei Lin, a local agricultural engineer who will be essential to your assessment." His deliberate elevation of Mei's status to engineer rather than farmer wasn't lost on either woman. Ms. Lin has already identified key hydrological features that our satellite surveys missed. Dr. Lin's professional expression betrayed momentary surprise before she nodded respectfully to Mei. "We'd be very interested in your insights, Ms. Lin." What followed was a flurry of activity as the specialists deployed sophisticated equipment throughout the valley. Mei found herself working alongside Dr. Lin, explaining the historical water management systems and demonstrating her adaptations to drought conditions. Despite her initial intimidation at working with formally educated scientists, Mei discovered her practical knowledge often complemented their theoretical expertise, creating a surprisingly productive collaboration. By sunset, the preliminary data had begun to paint an intriguing picture. The underground springs Mei had identified showed greater potential than initially suspected, with water quality tests revealing mineral compositions ideal for agricultural applications. The soil samples, despite years of drought stress, demonstrated remarkable resilience and nutrient retention. As the assessment team continued their work into the evening, using powerful spotlights to illuminate their equipment, James and Mei withdrew to a quiet corner of the village square. The locals had prepared a communal meal, a gesture of cautious welcome to the visitors, whose presence represented both uncertainty and possibility. "Your team seems impressed by what they're finding," Mei observed, accepting a bowl of traditional noodles from one of the village women. James nodded, his expression guarded but hopeful. "The initial data is promising. Better than I expected, actually." He lowered his voice. "But there's a complication. Dr. Lin received a message from our corporate headquarters. The board chair has moved up the final site vote to the day after tomorrow." Mei felt her heart sink. "That's before your team can complete a comprehensive assessment, before the regional council votes on our village's status." "Yes, James." confirmed grimly. I suspect Director Zhao learned of my interest in Longhua and is attempting to force a decision before I can present a complete alternative proposal. Can't you delay the vote as CEO? Mei asked, still learning the complexities of corporate politics. James smiled wryly. My position isn't as absolute as you might think. The board can override me on major investment decisions, and Director Zhao controls significant voting shares. He tapped his fingers thoughtfully against his bowl. She's been advocating strongly for the other site, where, coincidentally, she has personal connections to local officials. The implications were clear. Their fledgling hope for Longhua faced not just technical hurdles, but also corporate power, struggles beyond their control. What can we do? Mei asked simply. James considered the question with the focused intensity she had come to recognize as his problem-solving mode. We need to accelerate everything. The assessment, the community, proposal, the financial projections. I need something compelling enough to sway the board within 36 hours. Before Mei could respond, a commotion near the helicopter drew their attention. A sleek black SUV had pulled into the village square, dust billowing around its government plates. The driver's door opened to reveal a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, his expression suggesting both authority and irritation. Director Zhou, James muttered, rising to greet the newcomer despite his injured ankle. Regional Planning Commission. I wasn't expecting him until tomorrow. Mei followed, apprehension building as she recognized one of the most powerful government officials in the province, a man known for favoring large-scale development over traditional communities. She had met him once before at an agricultural conference where he had dismissed her sustainable farming presentation as quaint but impractical. Director Zhou, welcome to Longhua, James greeted him with professional courtesy. We weren't expecting you this evening. The official barely acknowledged the greeting, his gaze sweeping critically over the village and the Chen innovations. Team. When I received reports of corporate helicopters landing in a village scheduled for reclassification review, I thought it prudent to investigate personally. His attention settled on Mei with recognition. Ah, Ms. Lin, still pursuing your alternative agricultural methods, I see. Mei bowed respectfully despite the condescension in his tone. Director Zhou, yes, our traditional techniques combined with sustainable innovations have shown promising results, even during the drought. Charming, he replied dismissively before turning back to James. Mr. Chen, I'm surprised to find you personally involved in such a remote location. Your company's Government Relations Office has been in extensive discussions regarding the Longhua Valley site for months. The detour is unexpected. James maintained his professional demeanor. We're conducting a comparative assessment of alternative locations before finalizing our decision. Standard due diligence. Director Zhou's expression suggested he wasn't convinced. Perhaps we could speak privately. There are regulatory considerations regarding this region that you may not be fully aware of. As the two men moved toward the government vehicle for their discussion, Mei felt a hand on her arm. She turned to find Elder Wu beside her, his wise eyes concerned. This is the moment of trial, the old man murmured, when promises are truly tested. What do you mean? Mei asked quietly. Director Zhou has powerful friends who have already purchased options on much of the surrounding land, Wu explained. They anticipated Longhua's designation as non-viable and planned extensive development once the village was emptied. Luxury resorts taking advantage of our mountain views and clean air. The revelation stunned Mei. You knew this and didn't? Then tell me. Wu sighed heavily. What purpose would it serve? We had no power to fight such forces, but now... He nodded toward James, still engaged in increasingly tense conversation with Director Zhou. Now the jade oath brings unexpected strength to our side. Mei watched the two men, reading their body language even from a distance. James stood with respectful attentiveness but unmistakable resolve, while Director Zhou's gestures grew more animated with apparent frustration. "What can we do to help?" she asked Wu. The elder's weathered face creased in a small smile. "What you always do, child. Find a way forward when others see only obstacles." He patted her hand gently. "And perhaps show our visitor that some promises transcend business calculations." As Director Zhou finally departed, his expression thunderous, James returned to where Mei and Elder Wu waited. His composed exterior remained intact, but Mei had learned to recognize the tension around his eyes. "Problems?" she asked simply. "Director Zhou was kind enough to inform me that the Regional Planning Commission has already prepared its recommendation to classify Longhua as non-viable," James replied, his careful tone not quite masking his anger. "The vote is essentially a formality." He also suggested that pursuing alternative development plans here could result in regulatory complications for Chen Innovation's other projects in the province. "A threat," Elder Wu observed calmly. "A reality check," James corrected, though without conviction. He's not wrong about the practical challenges. Reversing a non-viable designation once it's been recommended would require political capital I'm not sure we have. Mei studied his expression, sensing the internal conflict between his business instincts and his growing commitment to honoring his grandfather's promise. "What are you thinking?" she asked directly. James looked out over the village where locals and corporate specialists continued their work under the evening stars, an unlikely collaboration born of necessity and possibility. "I'm thinking we need to change the narrative. Right now, this is being framed as a business decision competing with political interests." His hand moved unconsciously to his jade pendant. "But it's actually something more fundamental. The oath," Elder Wu said with approval. "The promise to protect not just land, but a living heritage." "Exactly," James agreed, his resolve visibly strengthening. "Director Zhou is thinking in terms of standard development metrics. We need to demonstrate that Longhua represents something that can't be quantified in conventional terms, something worth preserving precisely because it can't be replicated elsewhere." Mei felt a surge of hope at his words. "How do we do that in less than 36 hours? James's expression shifted into decisive focus. "We work through the night. I'll have more specialists flown in immediately. We'll document everything: the traditional knowledge, the agricultural innovations, the community cohesion, the unique ecological factors. By morning, I want comprehensive evidence that Longhua isn't just a struggling village, but a living laboratory of sustainable practices that align perfectly with Chen Innovation's core mission." "And if the board still votes against you?" Elder Wu asked quietly. "If Director Zhou's pressure proves too strong?" James met the old man's gaze directly. "Then I'll find another way. Some promises can't be broken without breaking something essential in yourself." He looked down at his pendant. "I think my grandfather understood that better than I have, until now." As the night progressed, Longhua transformed into a hive of activity. Additional Chen Innovation specialists arrived, bringing sophisticated equipment to document the village's unique features. Elders who had rarely shared their knowledge with outsiders found themselves demonstrating ancient techniques for soil management and water conservation, their wisdom recorded by respectful corporate researchers. Mei worked tirelessly alongside James, her shyness forgotten in the urgency of their mission. Together, they mapped the underground spring network, calculated potential water yields, and designed preliminary integration plans that would preserve traditional farming areas while incorporating modern research facilities. Near midnight, as They paused briefly for tea beside one of the assessment stations. James received a call that darkened his expression immediately. "Director Zhao has demanded my return to Shanghai for an emergency executive meeting tomorrow morning," he explained. After ending the call, "She's insisting on reviewing all site options before the board vote." "You have to go," Mei said, disappointment evident despite her understanding. "Yes, but not empty-handed." James gestured to the data accumulating on their tablets. "We'll have preliminary findings by dawn. It won't be the comprehensive case I'd hoped for, but it might be enough to buy us time." As they returned to work with renewed urgency, Mei found herself stealing glances at James, this man who had entered her life as a stranger in need of rescue, and now stood as perhaps Longhua's only hope for survival. Something beyond their shared mission had begun to form between them, a connection neither had anticipated but both increasingly valued. Dawn broke over the mountains, painting the valley in golden light that seemed to bless their efforts. The assessment team had compiled remarkable findings. The underground springs could potentially yield 40% more water than originally estimated. The soil composition contained rare microbiomes particularly suited to drought-resistant agriculture, and the traditional farming techniques preserved by the community had applications for sustainable food production that aligned perfectly with Chen Innovation's research goals. As the helicopter prepared for James's departure, Mei handed him a small cloth bundle. "For your journey," she said simply. Inside, he found a carefully crafted model of Longhua's traditional water management system, rendered in miniature using materials from Mei's greenhouse. The intricate design demonstrated how ancient wisdom and modern technology could work in harmony, a physical representation of everything they had been documenting through the night. "This is," James began, clearly moved by the gesture. "Something to show your board," Mei finished practically, though her eyes conveyed deeper meaning. "A tangible reminder of what we're fighting for." As the helicopter lifted off, carrying James back to the corporate battleground in Shanghai, Mei watched until it disappeared behind the mountain ridge. Elder Wu appeared beside her, his weathered hand resting supportively on her shoulder. "You've done all you can," he said gently. "Now we must trust that the Jade Oath will guide him in the difficult hours ahead." Mei nodded, her gaze still fixed on the empty sky. "It's strange," she said quietly. "A week ago, I was preparing for defeat, trying to find peace with the inevitable loss of our home. Now you have hope," Wu finished. "And perhaps something more?" Mei's cheeks colored slightly, but she didn't deny the elder's perceptive observation. "I've never met anyone who understands both worlds as he does, the traditional and the modern, the practical and the visionary." Wu smiled knowingly. "Perhaps that understanding is exactly what both Longhua and Chen Innovations need, a bridge between past wisdom and future possibility." The day passed, with agonizing slowness, as Mei and the villagers waited for news. The assessment team continued their work, but without James's decisive presence, an air of uncertainty had descended. By evening, with still no word from Shanghai, many began to fear the worst. Mei retreated to her greenhouse, finding solace in the familiar routine of tending her experimental plants. As darkness fell, she heard Baobao's welcoming bark and looked up to see Dr. Lin approaching with a tablet in hand. "Ms. Lin," the scientist greeted her. "I've received preliminary geological survey results I thought you should see immediately." The data displayed on the screen made Mei's eyes widen. "Is this accurate? The aquifer extends this far?" Dr. Lin nodded, professional excitement overriding corporate reserve. "Your traditional maps were remarkably precise. With modern drilling techniques, we could access water reserves sufficient for both agricultural needs and research operations, with minimal environmental impact." "This could change everything," Mei breathed, hope resurging. "Have you sent this to James, to Mr. Chen?" "That's the problem," Dr. Lin admitted. "We've been unable to reach him. All communications are being directed through Director Zhao's office, and she's not responding to our updates." Mei's mind raced, understanding the implications. She's isolating him before the board vote, preventing new information that might support Longhua from reaching the decision-makers. Dr. Lin's carefully neutral expression confirmed Mei's assessment. "I cannot comment on internal corporate politics, Ms. Lin. I can only say that these findings should be considered before any final decision is made." A plan began forming in Mei's mind, bold, perhaps foolish, but necessary. "How quickly could you prepare a complete presentation of all our findings, something comprehensive enough to convince skeptical board members?" "By morning," Dr. Lin replied without hesitation. "My team has been compiling data continuously." "And is there room on tomorrow's helicopter back to Shanghai?" Mei asked, her voice steady despite the audacity of what she was considering. Dr. Lin studied her thoughtfully. "You're planning to go to the board meeting yourself?" "Someone needs to ensure they have all the facts," Mei replied simply. "I may not understand corporate politics, but I know this valley better than anyone. If James, Mr. Chen, is being prevented from presenting the complete picture, then perhaps I can help." For a moment, Dr. Lin's professional mask slipped, revealing unexpected respect. "It would be highly irregular, but then this entire situation has been unusual from the start." She made a decision. "I'll arrange it. The helicopter departs at 6 a.m. That night, Mei barely slept, preparing for a journey far beyond her comfort zone. She had never left Yunnan province, let alone visited a major city like Shanghai. The thought of standing before powerful corporate executives made her stomach clench with anxiety. Yet the alternative, doing nothing while Longhua's fate was decided without all the facts, was unthinkable. Before dawn, she visited her parents' graves on the eastern ridge, drawing strength from their memory. "I will fight for our home," she promised softly, "with everything I have." Elder Wu met her at the helicopter, pressing a small package into her hands. "Your grandmother's formal jacket," he explained, "and this." He added a small scroll tied with red thread. "Words of wisdom for when your courage falters." The journey to Shanghai passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation, as Mei studied the complete assessment data with Dr. Lin, rehearsing key points and practicing explanations of traditional techniques in terms corporate executives might understand. As the helicopter approached the gleaming metropolis, Mei's breath caught at the forest of skyscrapers stretching to the horizon, a world entirely different from her quiet valley. The Chen Innovations headquarters dominated the skyline, its innovative design incorporating living walls and solar surfaces, making it instantly recognizable. "The board meeting began 30 minutes ago," Dr. Lin informed her as they hurried through the building's impressive lobby. "We'll need to request special entry." Security proved an immediate obstacle, with guards politely but firmly refusing to allow an unscheduled visitor into the executive level. As Mei's hopes began to falter, an authoritative voice cut through the standoff. "She's with me." Mei turned to find a distinguished older woman in elegant business attire regarding her with curious eyes. The security team immediately deferred to her presence. "Mrs. Chen," Dr. Lin greeted her respectfully, "thank you for your intervention. This is Mei Lin from Longhua Village. She has critical information for the board's consideration." "I know exactly who she is," Mrs. Chen replied, her gaze never leaving Mei's face. "My son has mentioned you in his calls." With a jolt, Mei realized she was facing James's mother, a woman who likely held significant influence within the company her late husband had built. The board vote is about to occur, Mrs. Chen continued, gesturing toward the elevator. If you have something to contribute, it must be now. As they ascended to the executive floor, Mrs. Chen studied Mei with undisguised interest. My son rarely advocates so passionately for anything beyond technical merit. Longhua must be quite special. It is, Mei replied simply. Not just to me, but to your family's history as well. Mrs. Chen's eyebrow raised slightly. Indeed. Perhaps you can explain that connection to our board members. They respect heritage more than they admit. The boardroom doors opened to reveal a scene of corporate theater in progress. Director Zhao stood at the head of an imposing table. Her presentation displaying compelling images of the competing Longhua Valley site. James sat opposite, his expression controlled but frustrated, a stack of hastily assembled materials before him. All eyes turned as Mrs. Chen entered with Mei beside her. Director Zhao's presentation faltered mid-sentence. Please continue, Director, Mrs. Chen said smoothly. But afterward, I believe we should hear from Ms. Lin, who has traveled from Longhua with updated assessment data. James's expression transformed from surprise to carefully contained hope as he met Mei's gaze across the room. In that moment of connection, something passed between them, a shared determination that transcended their different worlds. Director Zhao recovered quickly. With all respect, Mrs. Chen, we cannot delay critical infrastructure decisions for last-minute appeals from affected communities. The board has procedures. The board, Mrs. Chen interrupted gently, has a responsibility to consider all relevant information before voting on a billion-yuan investment, particularly when that information concerns both our company's heritage and its future. She gestured toward Mei. I believe Ms. Lin has exactly such information to share. As Mei moved to the presentation position, clutching her tablet and the small model she had created for James, she felt her lifelong shyness threatening to overwhelm her. The faces around the boardroom table, powerful, skeptical, impatient, blurred in her vision as panic rose. Then her fingers found the jade pendant she had borrowed from her grandfather's memorial tablet, the matching half to the one James wore. Its smooth surface, worn by generations of touch, centered her. She remembered Elder Wu's words, "Find a way forward when others see only obstacles." Taking a deep breath, Mei began to speak, not with the corporate polish of Director Zhao, but with the authentic passion of someone fighting for their home and heritage, as she shared the comprehensive assessment data demonstrating how Longhua's traditional wisdom complemented Chen Innovation's cutting-edge research goals. She found her voice growing stronger. The miniature water management model drew particular interest as board members leaned forward to examine its ingenious design. When Mei explained how similar systems could be scaled to address water scarcity issues throughout the region, even Director Zhao's expression registered reluctant interest. What Ms. Lin hasn't mentioned, James added, rising to stand beside her in a clear show of support, is that Longhua Village holds special significance for Chen Innovations. My grandfather made a sacred oath to protect this community, a commitment symbolized by this jade pendant I wear. He removed the pendant, placing it beside Mei's matching half on the boardroom table. Together, the pieces formed a perfect whole, their connection unmistakable. Our company was founded on principles that honor both innovation and heritage, James continued. The Longhua Valley site offers certain logistical advantages, but Longhua provides something far more valuable, a living laboratory of sustainable practices developed over centuries, practices that align perfectly with our research. Goals. I thought I might find you here, James said, approaching quietly to join her. You always seek water when you need to think. Mei smiled, unsurprised by his observation. Their year of collaboration had created a deep understanding between them, transcending their different backgrounds. "Water remembers," she said simply. "It carries the history of all it has touched, yet remains open to new paths forward." "A bit like you," James replied, settling beside her on the stone bench. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fading light transform the landscape. When James finally spoke again, his voice carried unusual vulnerability. "I realize the position I offered might seem like I'm trying to pull you into my world," he said carefully. "That wasn't my intention." "I know," Mei assured him. "You've never tried to change who I am or what I value. It's one of the things I most appreciate about our partnership." The slight hesitation before the word partnership hung between them, acknowledging the undefined nature of their relationship. Professional colleagues, certainly, friends, undoubtedly, but with an undercurrent of something deeper neither had directly addressed. "The truth is," James continued, "the position was created because Chen Innovations is changing. This past year has transformed not just Longhua, but our entire corporate philosophy. The board has recognized that what we've built here represents the future, not just of sustainable agriculture, but of responsible development itself." He turned to face her directly. "We need your perspective, Mei. Not to bring you into our world, but to help reshape that world into something better." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. This wasn't merely a job offer. It was an acknowledgement that the wisdom she had fought to preserve held value far beyond what either of them had initially recognized. "What about Director Zhao?" Mei asked, recalling the formidable board member who had so strongly opposed the Longhua project initially. "Would she accept my appointment?" James smiled. "Director Zhao was the one who proposed it. After visiting last quarter and seeing the production metrics, she became our strongest advocate. She said, and I quote, 'We need more people who understand that true sustainability isn't built in boardrooms.'" Mei laughed softly, still amazed by how dramatically perspectives had shifted over the past year. Even the most skeptical corporate executives and government officials had eventually recognized the power of the Longhua model once tangible results emerged. "I'll consider it seriously," she promised, "but there's something else we should discuss first." Her hand moved unconsciously to the jade pendant she now wore openly, her grandfather's half of the matched set that had brought them together. James nodded, his expression suggesting he understood exactly what she meant. "The personal aspect of our relationship." "Yes," Mei confirmed, finding courage to address what had remained unspoken between them. "We've built something remarkable here, James. Not just the research campus or the revitalized village, but a connection between us that transcends professional collaboration." "I've felt it too," he admitted, the corporate mask falling away. "Completely. From those first days when you rescued me during the storm, there's been something inevitable about our path together." "Like the jade pieces finding their way back to each other," Mei suggested, referencing the symbol that had become central to the Longhua story. "Exactly that," James agreed. "But I've been hesitant to pursue it explicitly. The power dynamics between us, my corporate position, the village's dependence on Chen Innovations, created complications I didn't want to exploit." Mei appreciated his sensitivity, recognizing it as further evidence of the integrity that had drawn her to him. From the beginning, those concerns mattered a year ago when everything was uncertain, she acknowledged. But now, Longhua stands on its own merits. The partnership between the village and Chen Innovations benefits both equally. We've moved beyond dependency to mutual respect. The last light of day faded from the sky, stars beginning to appear. Above the mountains that had sheltered Longhua for centuries, in this moment of transition from day to night, past to future, Mei found clarity about the path forward. "I'll accept the position," she decided, her voice steady with newfound certainty. not to leave Longhua behind, but to ensure its wisdom reaches places that need it, and not just as a corporate representative, but as someone who believes in the possibility of bridging worlds that once seemed impossibly distant. James's expression brightened with genuine joy. "You'll be extraordinary in the role. The board will be thrilled." "And us?" Mei asked directly, her natural shyness giving way to the courage she had developed through their shared challenges. "What becomes of us as individuals, James?" Instead of answering immediately, James reached into his pocket and withdrew a small silk pouch. From it, he produced two slender bands, one carved from pale jade, the other from darker stone, designed to interlock perfectly while maintaining their distinct characters. "I commissioned these from Master Huang's grandson," he explained. "He's combined modern crafting techniques with traditional carving methods, a perfect symbol of the balance we've been working toward." He offered one of the bands to Mei. "Not a proposal, at least not yet, but a promise that whatever path we choose, we'll walk it together, honoring both your world and mine, creating something stronger through their union." Mei accepted the band, its cool surface warming against her skin as she slipped it onto her finger. The gesture was neither traditionally Chinese nor conventionally Western. It was uniquely theirs, representative of the new paradigm they had created together. "I would like that very much," she said simply, her voice carrying all the emotion words alone couldn't express. As they walked back toward the village, now illuminated with lanterns for the evening celebration, Mei reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a desperate rescue during a typhoon had evolved into a partnership that was transforming not just their lives, but countless others throughout the region. The evening festivities were already underway when they rejoined the community. Villagers who had once faced displacement now celebrated their revitalized home, dancing to music that blended traditional instruments with contemporary rhythms, another symbolic fusion of past and future. Elder Wu approached, his wise eyes immediately noticing the matching bands they wore. "So the jade oath extends to a new generation," he observed with quiet satisfaction. "It does," Mei confirmed, "though we're still determining exactly what form that will take." The elder nodded approvingly. "The best promises leave room for growth, like the bamboo that bends without breaking." He gestured toward the celebration around them. "All of this began because you ventured out in a storm to help a stranger, Mei Lin. Never underestimate how profoundly a single act of courage can change the world." As the night deepened, Mei and James joined the community dances, their movements initially awkward, but gradually finding harmony, much like their professional and personal relationships had evolved over the past year. Around them, villagers and corporate team members alike celebrated not just the official opening of the research campus, but the birth of a new model for honoring both heritage and innovation. Later, as lanterns floated skyward, carrying wishes for prosperity and wisdom, Mei stood with James on the same ridge where she had watched him depart by helicopter a year earlier. Below them, Longhua Village glowed with renewed life and purpose, no longer facing extinction, but standing as a beacon of sustainable integration. "When I was a child," Mei shared, "my father told me that true wisdom isn't found in choosing between tradition and progress, but in recognizing that each needs the other to thrive. I didn't fully understand then, but now we're living proof of that principle," James finished, gently taking her hand, "and together we'll help others discover the same truth." Above them, the stars wheeled in ancient patterns recognized by countless generations of Longhua residents, while below, new patterns of light traced the outlines of a village reborn through the unlikely partnership of a shy farmer and a corporate CEO. Two people from different worlds united by a storm, a jade oath, and a shared vision of a future that honored the best of both their heritages. As one final lantern ascended, carrying their joint wish written in characters that combined their distinct handwriting styles, Mei felt a profound sense of completion, not an ending, but a beginning rich with possibility. The journey ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, but they would face them together, strengthened by the knowledge that the most enduring innovations grow from roots planted firmly in respect for what came before. "Ready for whatever comes next?" James asked, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had found his true path. Mei nodded, the shy farmer girl still present within the emerging leader she had become. "Ready," she confirmed, her voice clear and certain despite the magnitude of the journey ahead. Together, they turned toward the path that would lead them back to the village celebration. A path that symbolized the bridge they had built between worlds once thought incompatible, between a heritage worth preserving and a future waiting to be created. 3 years later, the Longhua model had spread beyond Yunnan province to transform rural communities throughout Asia. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a single village had evolved into a movement that was reshaping approaches to sustainable development worldwide. On a crisp autumn morning, a small gathering assembled beneath the spirit gate, where two young men had once made an oath on jade. The crowd was intimate, just village elders, close friends and family members, intentionally different from the corporate ceremonies and government functions that had become regular occurrences in Longhua's new role as a demonstration site for integrated development. Mei Lin stood beside the gate, wearing a wedding dress that honored traditional elements while incorporating contemporary design, much like the life she and James had crafted together. Her once shy demeanor had transformed into quiet confidence, though those who knew her best could still glimpse moments of the reserved farmer who had once believed her village was destined for abandonment. James waited for her, his expression one of profound contentment, a man who had found purpose far deeper than corporate success. The jade bands they had exchanged years earlier had been incorporated into their wedding rings, symbols of continuity in their evolving journey. Elder Wu, now moving slowly but still carrying the wisdom of generations, presided over the ceremony. "What we witness today is more than the union of two people," he told the gathered circle. "It is the fulfillment of a promise made long ago, and the beginning of new promises that will extend into future generations." As Mei and James exchanged vows beneath the gate where their grandfathers had once stood as sworn brothers, the symmetry was not lost on anyone present. What had begun as a desperate rescue during a typhoon had culminated in a partnership that had not only saved Longhua, but created a model for preserving traditional wisdom in a rapidly changing world. From this day forward, they promised each other, "We will walk together between worlds, honoring the paths that brought us here while creating new ones for those who will follow." Above them, carved into the spirit gate's ancient wood, a new inscription had been added beside the original. Text: "When wisdom from the past meets vision for the future, impossible bridges become possible paths forward." For the shy farmer girl who had once struggled to speak in village meetings, and the corporate CEO who had lost connection with his family's roots, these words represented not just their personal journey, but the philosophy that now guided communities throughout the region. A philosophy that recognized the most sustainable future would be built by those brave enough to honor both where they came from and where they hoped to go. As cherry blossoms drifted down around the celebration, nature itself seemed to bless this union of apparent opposites that had discovered their profound complementarity, a living testament to the truth that the most transformative innovations often emerge not from discarding tradition, but from finding new ways to carry its wisdom forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.